first, and you'll count the motion as passed if there are none. So if you're going to object, make sure that you do so early and loudly. There was a link to the advance packet sent out in an email by Steve on Monday afternoon. The email also included a couple of documents that were too large for the packet. So we ask that you do mute your mics when not in use, especially since we're working through some of the audio issues with the hybrid setup. And we ask that you introduce yourself when giving a motion or a second or asking a question. I guess one other quick thing to cover for those of you on the phone, most of us in the room can see who is dialed in, and we've been able to retitle the phone numbers so that we have an idea of who's talking. For staff this morning, it's myself, Jim Saylor, Don Keel, Steve Herman, Catherine Lewis, and we have Kyle Postupak from the Rail Authority assisting with the sound. And as always, hey, I keep trying to keep us straight. Also in the room, we have our voting members, Sean McLaughlin and Mark Calusi, and then we have a stakeholder from Lewisburg Borough, Steve Beebe. And then Sean, you've got a new planner in the room, and I know I'm going to get the name wrong, so would you just take a quick second and introduce yourself?
Hi, my name is Lauren Russell. This is my second interview. Just graduated from Penn State majoring in community.
Well, Lauren, thank you. Glad to have you aboard, and sorry to put you on the spot like that. So that brings us through the call to order. The next agenda item is item B, public forum. Is there anyone on the call for the purpose of providing comment on an item not listed on the agenda? If so, please unmute yourself and let us know who you are and what issue you'd like to speak about. All right, then hearing none, we're going to move on to agenda item C, approval of the June 25th, 2021 MPO meeting minutes. The minutes are on pages 3 to 7 of the advanced packet. Hopefully you've had a chance since Monday to review those. Are there any additions or changes that should be considered for the minutes before we ask the MPO to adopt them?
Hey, Jim Saylor, this is Dean Roberts. Can you hear me?
Yes, sir.
Hey, having done a couple of these hybrid type meetings, I find it really good if the people that are actually there at the meeting talk loud and slow.
Understood. We'll try and accommodate you.
Unless your name's Sean McLaughlin, then you don't have to talk at all.
Careful, Dean. He's going to flip the table here in a minute. All right. With that reminder, is there a motion to adopt the minutes as presented?
Steve Phillips, motion.
Thank you, Steve. Is there a second?
Eric Staley, second.
Thank you, Eric. It's been motioned and seconded. Are there any members who wish to object to the adoption of the minutes as they are presented? If so, please signify by saying nay now. All right, and are there any members that wish to abstain? Hearing none, then we count the minutes as adopted as presented. Thank you. That brings us to item D, the TIP administrative modifications and amendments. So it's been 3 months since the last meeting. There are a lot of cleanup changes. The changes for District 2 start on page 9 of the advanced packet. And just to give you a very quick summary of that, going through, we saw 4 projects with cost increases, including one getting funds from the statewide railroad crossing item. We saw scheduling changes for 5 projects, 3 coming forward, 2 pushed back. and 2 projects receiving funding through the advanced construction process, plus one of our safety projects being caught in what they call the year-end HSIP cleanup. So with that very brief summary of the administrative changes for the TIP in District 2, are there any questions for Mr. Schultz on particular projects? All right, then hearing none, do we have a motion to adopt the TIP changes as presented? So moved, Mark. Mark, thank you for the motion. Is there a second? Sean, thank you for the second. Any questions or further discussion? Hearing none, then we ask that any members that oppose to adopting the TIP modifications as presented, please signify now by saying nay. And are there any members that wish to abstain? All right, then hearing none, we will count the administrative actions for District 2 accepted as presented. Thank you. The changes for District 3 start on page 11. And doing a similar breakdown, we saw 14 projects with cost increases.
Yeah, it's recording on this computer.
6 projects with cost savings. 1 project where a phase was added to the TIP. 2 projects where unused phases were removed. 3 projects with cash flow adjustments where the overall funding amount for the project didn't change. And 24 projects where the program year was adjusted. That's covering a lot of ground. Are there any questions on those changes for District 3? All right, then hearing none, do we have a motion to accept the administrative actions for District 3 as presented?
Hoffman, I'll make that motion.
Lincoln, second. You want to hear Lincoln, Hoffman second?
Yeah, let's give Lincoln the second, and we'll take the motion that's coming from Sean McLaughlin. Thank you. Are there any further questions or discussion? Hearing none, then are there any members who wish to object to the administrative actions for District 3 being accepted as presented? Hearing none, are there any members that wish to abstain? All right, then hearing none, we will count the administrative actions for District 3 accepted as presented. Thank you. All right, the next thing to hit under item B is we asked you to adopt an amendment to the TIP at the June meeting. After the meeting, we had a small technical correction, just correcting the funding type for part of the total funding. You do not think that that has to be voted on again, but we are presenting it as an informational item just to make sure that we're clear about how the money is broken out and what was actually added to the TIP. So that updated chart is presented on page 20 of your packet. Are there any questions about that item? Okay. Moving on, the next page is the list of projects that have been approved by the MPO pending available funding. There are no changes to that list since June. We did want to give you a heads up. One of the projects that previously went through that process, the Commerce Drive project in Mifflin County, we had a cost overrun, and as a result, we're going to reapply for local access roads from ARC in the round that will accept applications, full applications this December. We expected that to go to the SEDA COG board in August. It didn't quite get there, so we expect that to come up at next week's board meeting. As far as the MPO process goes, since this is a project that the MPO has already voted on to approve it being added to the TIP, and since our whole reason for concern in having our local access roads go through that process is to make sure that proper coordination is happening between the project sponsor, the local municipality, the county member, and the district. And this whole suggestion that we apply again for the ARC funds came as a result of that coordination happening the way we like to see it. We checked in with the MPO member on this, but we don't think we're going to have to bring that to the MPO for a vote, since it's just continuing the project that you've already accepted, and it's operating the way we want to see it happen. So it's an informational item. We don't see it requiring any changes. That funding should be able to be simply added to the TIP should their application be successful. Starting on page 23, we've got the listing of the simplified tip sheets. This is something that we provide 2 to 3 times per year. What we're trying to do here is just, if you've been doing this for a while, you're familiar with the tip charts. They're pretty complicated. This is just trying to simplify and straighten things out so that each project is only a one-line listing on the table. It's an effort to make it easy for you to understand what's on the current tip for your county. So each project has the PennDOT name listed, the NPMS number, funding amount, and then just some basic information, whether it's new or carryover, the type of project, and when it was added to the tip and when construction starts. There's no action required with this. This is just something we're sharing so it's easy for you to understand what you've got on the current tip. If you have any questions, please feel free to reach out to staff on that. Myself, Steve, or Catherine, any of us should be able to help you through that. So that wraps up item D, and it brings us up to item E, the CSBT project. And this time we're also requesting to add an update to the SR 54 safety project status reports. Justin, are you covering that for District 3 today?
I can go over the CSBT update.
That would be
Can everybody hear me?
yes, sir.
Okay. The northern section, the contractor recently began asphalt paving. This is expected to continue until October. And the wearing course will be placed in 2022. And as of right now, the completion is expected to be late 2022. The southern section, currently we're just waiting on right-of-way clearance, which we hope to have in a few days so we can submit to obligate federal funding and advertise the first contract. Any other questions or concerns?
Not seeing any around the room, and if there's not any coming online, I think we're clear. Maybe a quick thank you to those of you who were able to participate in the public meeting for the CSBT Special Impact Study on Monday. That seems to have been well received. And then, Justin, sorry for throwing you the curveball about the SR 54 project. We promised to give you more lead before the November meeting.
Is that all that you need, is just an update for that? I can get that for you, or get John to talk to him and get that for the committee.
I think just if we come back with it for November, that should be fine. It's just it's a major project, and when we go too long without talking about it, we tend to get some questions on the local side. So just the same kind of 10,000-foot overview that you've been sharing with us for the CSBT would be terrific. And again, I apologize if I threw you guys a curve by not giving you enough lead that we were asking for that.
No problem. Thank you. I'll pass it on to John and Chris.
Okay. All right. If there are no questions for Justin, that brings us up to item F, The
Hey,
adoption.
yes, hi, this is Gene from Federal Highway. I apologize, I've been having some connection issues. Before we get any further into the meeting, one of the items was listed there as an amendment in the meeting packet. Is that correct? Back on page 20?
That is an update to an amendment that the members voted on at the June meeting. And coming out of the June meeting, there was a request to make a small change in the funding shares between the various categories. So we presented that at this meeting as a follow-up so that everyone was clear which categories the funding was coming from. We weren't asking them to take action on that at this meeting.
Okay, because it was already voted on back at the June meeting.
Yes,
Okay, all right, thank you for clarifying that.
that's all right. Thank you for the question. All right, so then that winds us back up for item F, the regional operations plan. So if you've been coming to these meetings for a while, you might remember that we did the full update to the regional operations plan back in 2018. PennDOT, they moved from having a regional operations plan for each district to having 4 plans across the state. So District 3, District 2, and District 9 are in the same plan. And they held a series of stakeholder meetings through the summer and fall of 2018 that some of you were able to participate in. We adopted that plan back in December of 2018. And just over the last couple months, PennDOT has been working on a minor interim update. They brought us in as stakeholders. They gave us the chance to identify additional projects. And again, if you're not familiar with this, the plan identifies needs related to intelligent transportation systems. So these are things like cameras, weather stations, variable message signs, signal improvements, and similar projects. We were able to participate in a couple of the stakeholder calls in proposing additional projects. We drew from the Danville area traffic study, the long-range transportation plan update, and some of the connect sessions that have been held in the region since the last plan was completed. We were able to update and expand one project from the old plan and have 4 new projects added. There is a very brief, maybe 10-page summary of this that starts on page 41 of the packet. The full addendum of the plan, which is packaged as an appendix to the original plan, was included in the email that Steve sent out on Monday. So my question at this point is if you've had the chance to review the plan and if you would be comfortable taking action adopting this today. The significance of that is that it nominates these 4 or 5 projects listed for the region as our top priorities for traffic systems management and operations funding moving forward. The alternative approach, if you would like more time to review this, we can bring it back as an action item at the November meeting. So with that very short little bit of background about what the ROP is, how it came together, and the note that the new projects that we proposed are shown on page 45 of your packet. Is anyone on the call in a position where they have questions or an opinion about this? And if there are no strong opinions, is someone willing to make a motion for the adoption of the plan as presented?
Jim, this is Mark Lucy. Just a question about on table 2 on page 45, you have on item 9, the CSBT signal improvements. Does that afford us the opportunity that brings a new package of funding so that kind of offsets some of the funding for the roadway improvements? Or?
No, I don't think it would bring new significant funding to the table. I'd have to go out to the long range plan. I think what we're talking about with that is looking at the signals on the 11 and 15 strip.
Okay.
They've got funding for about 4 of those signals plugged into the CSVT, the ones where they have direct impacts. But the idea of carrying this forward is that as we get close to opening day for the southern section, we'd want to be doing a study and maybe applying for something like Green Light Go, or trying to find other TIP funding or TISMO funding, so that that whole coordinated system of 20 signals still works the way it should when you take 20,000 cars a day out of the mix.
Right. Okay, perfect. Thank you.
And my comment on page 52, should be Middleburg rather than Middlesburg. Maybe they're thinking Middlesburg chips there for IU-10, Middleburg signal improvements.
I must have had snacks on the mind as we were editing that. That came out of the Connect session that we were able to have in November of last year. All right, any other comments or discussion on the plan? Are we comfortable with this, or do we need a while to chew on it, that we should bring it back in November?
Sean McLaughlin, I'll make a motion to approve.
Sean, thank you for the motion.
Mark Calusi, second.
Mark, thank you for the second. Any further discussion? Any questions? All right, then hearing none, we'd ask that any members that object to the adoption of the regional operations plan update as presented signify by saying nay. And are there any members that would like to abstain? All right, then hearing none, we will count the regional operations plan update adopted as presented. Thank you.
And just procedurally, will the consultant be giving us like a final PDF we should post to the website as well for this?
We have that full version of item E would be it, and if need be, we can go out to the PennDOT website and pull down the full package with that. But that's a good catch, Steve. We should be posting that out there. All right, Steve, do you want me to begin to jump in at the front of item G, or do you want to roll through some of the discussion of that first?
I guess we'll just go in order with I can start.
Great.
Plug your program. Thank you, Jim. We're rolling on through the packet here. Those of you that are following remotely, this is item G, begins on page 54. We've been talking about the 2023 12-year program update for the past few meetings, touching on the State Transportation Commission, public outreach, and some of the results of that. And those of you that have been engaged on the local bridge prioritization process, that's been kind of our targets initially here on the 12-year program update. But there's some additional things that have come out from PennDOT, some finalized guidance, what we call the general and procedural guidance and the financial guidance. And that was all endorsed by the planning partner community in late June since we had last met. So here in the packet, we just have a few summary points here from the guidance that are included for your reference at the general and procedural level. And we try to certainly make sure that we share that information. It gets included when it goes out to the public for the outreach process as well, and helps to further digest and understand the information. But it's been made a little bit more concise and making use of references and links so that the document itself is not as overwhelming. But a couple highlights there procedurally. A new thing is that after the comment periods kind of resolved for the planning partners, there's going to be a new statewide Transportation Commission 15-day comment period, and that'll be from June 1st to the 15th. So there'll be another opportunity for the public across the state to go look at the information and offer comments for a 15-day period, and that'll be separate from the 30-day comment period that we as an MPO will put out when we advertise the tip. And we'll be looking by early June of next year to have that ratification by the MPO. So thinking around the April timeframe is where we would get approval to go advertise the draft tip, and then come the June meeting, look for approval of the 2023 tip for those projects that'll be active and underway starting October 1st of that year. So just rolling through the packet here a little bit and what you have. A lot of things that remain the same in terms of the formula. and how we go about that. But there's been more focus on performance measures, as we know, and lowest life cycle cost, and focused on those treatments rather than just a worst first type of philosophy. So that's been factored in at a higher level. The summary of some of these financial changes begin on page 59. And so we have a few of those factors there. One of the assumptions is the federal level funding is going to remain flat. We know things are percolating through Congress, and there might be a new transportation bill. Maybe we'll have to, reevaluate some of these criteria, but we'll sort through that. But the information, was available as we were going through this update process. Assumption was flat federal funding, and that state funding for the motor license fund would be about $152 million less over the first 4 years of the new TIP. And that's a lot of the impacts from the COVID-19 pandemic. And kind of what we heard most recently is traffic volumes have returned about 96% of the pre-pandemic levels. So there's still, gasoline purchases aren't occurring, and funds that aren't going into that motor license fund because of reduced travel. So the impacts of that will be felt on this TIP, but there's potential for a new federal bill, and certainly at the state level as well, with things coming out of the Funding Options Commission, which we have that summary in your packet if you want to check out some of those details and what may be acted on at a statewide level. As I mentioned, most of the formulas did not change, and one of the things we saw last time was the interstate focus. And certainly there are a lot of great needs out on the interstate system. And so that investment is going to continue to grow by $50 million per year until it would reach $1 billion in federal fiscal year 2028. So it addressed those substantial needs on the interstate system. Another thing to mention there, bottom of page 59, the SEDA COG region would actually see a 5% overall funding increase compared to our current 2021 TIP. And there'd be 30% gains during the first 2 years, then approximately 12% losses in the last 2 years of the TIP. And most of those gains are due to a couple main categories: the surface transportation program, the federal bridge, and state bridge funds would be increased. The next bullet there at the very bottom compares some of the distributions at a district level. So District 2 is going to see a little bit less overall funding, some modest gains in the first 2 years, and then some losses in the last 2 years of the TIP. And District 3 would see it's 27% higher overall, and that would include 50% gains in the first 2 years and 10% gains in the second 2 years. But certainly, we know there's program projects on the current TIP. We want to see those continue and advance. So we've had ongoing discussions with the PennDOT district staff and central office talking about these allocations and some funding swaps and different things that can be done to make sure we're not delaying or deferring any projects. So there's been agreements made there. And so those projects will continue, the top priorities across the districts. And then just for your review, we do have, starting on page 60, some charts that would give you a little bit of comparison of what these funding distributions are going to mean. And you can look at those by overall region, by district, and by either the program area or just by year. So that's included in the packet. And then the final thing we have is a timeline, kind of our graphic we've been doing the last couple rounds, page 62 of your packet. So we've come to about the midpoint there in fall of 2021. Some things that will be occurring. There's going to be PennDOT Connects meetings on new projects, so things that aren't carrying over, but some new projects. Those meetings will be held with the municipalities to make sure we're factoring in key concerns for them and impacts into the design process and accounting for that. The safety projects will be evaluated for the statewide safety set-aside funds. We do an environmental justice analysis on the program projects. And as we get into the late fall, the preliminary draft tips will be reviewed. And then come December, by the end of the year, will be a draft tip submission to PennDOT central office. And then the early part of the year will be kind of that final consensus building process with the PennDOT central office executive team. And then we would march forward to, as I said, early spring, have an evaluation of the draft tip, and then getting that approved for advertising for public comment, and come June, the adoption of the new draft tip. So we appreciate all your active involvement. It's really helped from the county members and the PennDOT district staff to review these local bridge priorities, some safety priorities, and others that you wanted to see factored into this new tip development. and key comments on things that are being carried over as well. Maybe some adjustments, new land development, items to consider. So just all your active participation has been great. It helps us to understand changes. Certainly it's fluid, this whole process, and tip development and project impact. So appreciate all you've done to date with this process. And I know Catherine's going to touch on here in a moment the local bridge prioritization scoring, and all your input on that process has been quite helpful to us. So that's what I wanted to hit on the tip development side. Are there questions on where we are currently or where we're going?
Steve, this is Mark Lucy. Just a question to consider going forward. I'm certain that you've done this. It's just not necessarily captured in the text.
Mm-hmm.
But you have listed 7 subgroups as subject matter experts. And one of the specific subjects that isn't specifically spelled out is active transportation.
Okay.
And we have a really active transportation committee in this region. And I thought maybe that might be worthwhile to consider, maybe not necessarily now, but at least going forward, to specifically spell out that those efforts are not going unnoticed, that those considerations can be taken into account when these TIP projects, for example, are being developed. And just giving kind of a voice to that and in a structured way, so that it's not just that, hey, look, we're trying to build a trail, we need money for that. It's not like an open-ended thing. It's more how you integrate that into the existing transportation fabric and be able to get people like Catherine to be able to provide input where needed.
That's helpful. Thank you. Yeah, and some of that's like the statewide level, and the different groups are brought in to give that a higher weight and a higher role in the process would be extra rather than after the fact consideration. So thank you for the comment, and thanks for the work you're doing within Mifflin County for your active transportation plan and developing that and getting that further along.
And then Steve, something I wanted to hit on is when we're talking about the shift in funds between District 2 and District 3, that's something that as an MPO we have a little bit of discretion on. The funding comes into the MPO as a planning area. We get some discretion on how it's split out between the districts. Our recommendation at the staff level is that the way the funds are broken out between the districts within the MPO should follow the same formulas that they use to allocate it between the various MPOs, so that the emphasis is now on the total extents of the system, the lane miles, and the square feet of deck area, and we've kind of ramped down the traditional focus on the lane miles in poor condition and the square feet of deck area in poor condition. What we're saying is that if we're going to hit, if that change is being done at a statewide level so that all of us hit the performance measures, that it makes sense that we'd also distribute the funds between our counties the same way so that we have the best chance to hit those performance measures going forward. The change does cause a little bit of pain, especially for District 2, because they did have some projects programmed, that we were starting on in the last tip, that because of this shift, they may not have the funds to carry forward. And so we had a series of discussions with PennDOT Central Office and with our district planning reps to talk about what those projects are, and does it make sense to just continue a few of these and get these done rather than rescoping them or pushing them out. And that is what's happening, where it makes more sense to maybe hold a little bit of funding in District 2 because we've got a couple of bridge preservation projects started. We want to carry those through to completion rather than just spending money pushing those out and having them delayed, rescoped, or what have you. So I want to make it clear, it is a decision for this body, that the staff recommendation is that the formulas within the area follow the way the formulas are broken out statewide, and that we've seen great coordination between the districts to make that work in a way that preserves the projects that we're already working on.
Thanks, Jim. Yeah, we've had a series of calls. It's been a great collaborative process. Our districts always work well together and deliver on these projects and top priorities. So we've had 3 rounds of calls on that, and it's been a great process. So appreciate the members as well, endorsing that. And having that continue. And the other project I think that would be impacted along with the bridge preservation is down in Mark's area, the SR 1005 Valley Road reconstruction. So there won't be negative impacts to that. That will continue to advance and be carried out as well along with the bridge preservation projects. Are there any questions about the TIP process, where we're heading? We'll continue to share more documents as we move along, as those things are built, the narrative that goes into it, the analysis, and all the other necessary attachments we have need to go out for the TIP comment process. We'll build those further and flesh that out come November and then the early meetings of 2022. But any questions on TIP development from any members here or remotely? If not, there's one other item we slid under here because it kind of relates to the next TIP, the new funding, and that starts on page 63. And it's a table of top priority projects. This came out of the recent PennDOT statewide solicitation for the MPOs to submit their top 3 priority projects that if there's a new transportation funding bill at the federal or state levels that would allow these projects to move, what are the top 3 priorities? They could be advancing something that is currently already programmed, enhancing or building on to a current project, or adding an entirely new project. And so we kind of culled through the long range plan, the active transportation plan, recent submissions for various grant programs, whether they're multimodal or transportation alternatives, Green Light Go, et cetera, and had a pretty large initial list, and we coordinated with the PennDOT district staff. And we had a 2-week window to submit this off to PennDOT central office, and had agreement that those listed there on page 63 were good projects and could hopefully move forward and be delivered by 2025 calendar year. So we have that listing there for you to consider. This isn't guaranteed. We don't know if there's going to be new funding. By including them on this list, it doesn't guarantee they'll be approved if there is a new funding bill. So there's certainly caveats and disclaimers there, but we thought these were high value projects, and wanted to put that in there for information. And then Jen or the districts, if you want any additional commentary or any other factors that went into this process.
I'd say we started with a list of about 20 projects, and the what we really relied on in striking the ones that didn't make this final list of 3 was whether they could be deliverable by 2025. And that took us down to a list of 4. And then from that last 4, we had one more project that we decided to go with, one in Montour, so that we were touching 4 counties across the region instead of only 3. So trying to incorporate a little bit of geographic representation as well. Again, that this is not a contract. There's no guarantee that that any of these projects would be funded. It's just intended to demonstrate some of the good things that we could do if we had more funding to work with.
And as you're along, we're mid-September. Current federal transportation bill expires at the end of this month. We'll see if anything happens, if it's just a run-of-the-mill extension or if there's a new transportation bill passed. But that all kind of play a part in this process for this activity to develop this top priority list and how these can advance in the future. Okay, any questions about the TIP process or anything else included in your packet under that agenda item G? Okay, thank you for your time, and we'll move on to item H, and Catherine's going to lead us through the local bridge prioritization projects for the next step.
Great, thank you. Good morning, everybody. So starting on page 65, there is a PowerPoint presentation. We're not going to share that on the video feed, but you can certainly follow along there. And also, I did want to point out there is a supplemental item that went out with the packet in the email from Steve, and that is the more in-depth ranking of all of the bridges and breaks down the points for a lot of those. So if you'd like to review that on your own, please feel free. If you didn't get that, certainly let us know and we will send that to you. So the first slide there, we have timeline. I'm not sure why the calendar didn't transfer over to a PDF version, but it's the same calendar we've shared a few times with you at previous meetings, just to illustrate that we are in the final step here and hopefully asking today for approval of the bridge ranking as presented. So moving to the next slide, I just went over briefly the data features that we look through when we have these bridge priorities. Just to break it down a little bit for you, we look at county priority, the impact of the residents, potential development, impact of facilities, some bridge information, and resiliency. These come from a multitude of locations, county data, state data, just local knowledge, and of course the county meetings that we have and we had in the spring. So lots of information there, and there's definitely more about that in that base sheet if you want to check that out and see more on where those items have come from. The next slide, I just wanted to point out a couple of things from this cycle and notes for the next cycle of this process. This cycle, we did return to a decision lens approach for it, and I do think that helped greatly with the process. We definitely added some quality control steps as part of our process as well. Some notes for the next cycle that we've gathered as we've gone through this again, and this has been my second cycle doing it. We are hoping to hold a process review session, which I will touch on a little bit more at the end of the presentation here. But as part of that, we want to review some of the data items, look at potentially new data items that we can include and address volume, some different items for bridge condition, and things like that. We also want to continue with the earlier timeline to meet our fall deadline that we have here for this process. So those are all important things for the next cycle and some good things that went down for this cycle. The next 3 pages are the ranking list. They're broken out by the BOF ranking list, and then there's a District 2 retroactive reimbursement ranking and a District 3 retroactive reimbursement ranking. So you can check those out and see where your bridges are in there. And down to the last slide quickly before I ask for any questions, just to circle back to the process review session. After talking with a few of the counties and going through the county meetings, it sounded like perhaps we could use some refreshers on the process and where it goes from here, some questions, and then also reevaluating, like I said, some of the data points and where we're getting that data from. Some other items perhaps we could include, and updating the process for where we are now versus where the MPO was when it was created a few years ago. So if anybody has any interest in that, please let me know. I'm probably going to reach out in early 2022 to set that up. So keep on the lookout for a poll for that meeting. But with that, does anyone have any questions on the process or any comments that they would like to bring up?
I'll just make this really brief. This is Mark Lewis. Just appreciate your efforts on this. Really appreciate you working so closely with us on that, especially me being new to this process. So
Sure.
yeah, you were very helpful to me, and thank you for that.
No problem. Thank you. Any other questions?
Catherine, this is Mark Schultz with District 2O.
Okay.
I want to also reach out and thank you for your efforts to reach out to the local municipalities to have these discussions and these meetings. It is great communication and a great effort to establish communication on these local needs. And thank you very much for that effort.
Awesome. Thank you. Any other questions or comments? If there are none, I would be interested in accepting a motion to approve the bridge listing as presented.
Mark Lewis, so moved.
Lincoln Kaufman, second.
Thank you, Mark, and thank you, Lincoln. All those opposed to the bridge listing as presented, please signify by saying aye. And anyone abstaining from the vote also signify by saying aye. Okay, thank you.
Great, thanks, Catherine. That brings us up to agenda item I in your packet. That's Transportation Alternative Set Aside Program Update. And page 74 begins our kind of normal milestones review on the existing projects in the 2018 round. And only one of those projects is currently still in the design process. All the others are either completed or actively in construction. So that lone project is the North Branch Canal Trail Levee Top Trail in Danville Borough. And that's still in design. And you'll see the estimated let dates there right now. And the notice to proceed for that one of 2023. And we'll learn more as that goes forward. And John Rank more likely to give us an update at the next meeting if you have questions on that one. That's the lone project from the former round that is not currently in construction. And you'll see there, if we've driven through Lewisburg, the Bowling Greenway, I think that's essentially completed there by Huffnagel Park and Kidsburg. At least in the MPMS system, it was saying construction was completed this summer. So great progress on that one. And I'm not sure if we have Katie. Is Katie on De Silva? Did she join us?
No, she's not able to.
She's not, okay. So see if she had an update on the Clinton County Rail Trail. But I know that's been going like gangbusters, and they have an extension of that they're in for an application for the next round as well. Renovo Borough, we'll mention there, that was just for study phase monies from the former round, and they've also applied for the next round to implement and get construction of their curb ramps and crosswalk upgrades and some stormwater issues there. So there'll be a connection to that one. And I think down in Brown Township, Freesville area, I think that project's essentially completed as well. So at least an MPMS, so people can correct us or we can update this for the next meeting in November, but yeah, really great progress on that round. So feel free to ask questions about those if you want at this moment. And if there aren't any, I'll then turn our attention to the 2021 round. We've been discussing that the last couple of meetings, and the round opened up officially for applications in late June 28th. And we did receive pre-applications that were due August 16th. There's 5, which are listed on page 76 of your packet. Those coming from the city of Sunbury, Catawissa Borough, Selinsgrove Borough, Clinton County for, again, an extension of the Bald Eagle Valley Trail, and Renova Borough. So one of the requirements is there needs to be meetings held with the district and the planning partner prior to a full application. Renova Boroughs has already been held, and the others are being scheduled. So that'll be carried out in some of those workflow processes and anything that needs to be further scrutinized or changed with their project, that'll come out of this pre-application process and hopefully make them more competitive and result in better projects and better processes. But the applications will be due on October 15th, the full applications, and that'll trigger submissions to the MPO as well. We'll get access to them. We'll look to distribute those out to the members. You can take a look at them. And those of you who want to be involved in the review committee, we're looking at that meeting being held November 16th at this room. We have time to sort through the mechanics of that process, but initially what we were thinking is to bring the applicants here, hopefully to maybe overcome technical issues with the Ring Central system, and that way they can get everything loaded up and hopefully present it. And then if any of you are in the room, you have that interplay and follow along. Those that are doing remotely, hopefully everything works for sharing screens in that process. But since we're in November, mitigation measures and everything, the pandemic, we're thinking that'll probably be a virtual prospect as well included. So that'll be November 16th. We should have enough time between getting the applications, take some initial analysis of that and make sure it gets out to the members ahead of the meeting, get you geared up for any questions, and probably, since we have 5 applications this time, maybe 15 minutes for presentations, 15 minutes for Q&A. And if we have flexibility there, we can probably work with that. I think last round we had 11 or 12 applications, so it's less this time. So hopefully those of you that are interested will be able to participate in the process, and we appreciate the time you put into that, and then to take those recommendations and comments to the full MPO at the meeting on November 19th. So we'll look to endorse that, be well ahead of the schedule of when those need to go into PennDOT in early January. So we'll get that kind of prioritization process, and any different comments that you want us to factor in and weigh in on these projects to work through that process. And I know, Kate really loves them, and we do as well. We get to hear firsthand from these sponsors about their needs and how the TA funding will help them really benefit their community. So we're glad for the applicants we got this phase. Well, there was a sixth one I'll just mention from McClure Borough in Snyder County. One aspect was probably ineligible, and the others may have been maybe difficult to put through the federal funding process. So they decided to sit this one out, further refine that and work on it. And we're going to set up a meeting with them hopefully in October to talk about different funding programs and options. But just wanted to mention there was a sixth that was in initially for a pre-application, but it's not going to be factored into this. But some additional outreach and coordination will occur. And Lincoln will get with you on that as well to have your involvement in that meeting with McClure Borough and some of the other funding agencies. So that's just kind of an overview of where we stand with the new round. We haven't seen full applications. This pre-app is just to kind of get the main items out there, and then to have these review meetings to further flesh it out and to help these applicants as they complete the rest of their application and get that in by mid-October. But is there any questions from the group right now on the submissions or the timeline for the next TA round? One thing I'll mention, we just heard, I think early part of this week, if you're curious, at a statewide level, there were 140 applications submitted, pre-applications. So we know it's always competitive, this process. There's a lot of interest and there's limited funding, but 140 across the state, 5 from our region. And the amount we expect to be available was 18 million statewide. We all know there's uncertainty on the federal bill, but if it's extended or passed in some manner, we would expect about another 18 million to be in play that could be allocated through this round of funding. So hopefully that is successful, and we'll have some additional funds that can go to projects, and we'll see some approvals within our region. So more to come on alternatives. Again, October 15th will be the deadline for full applications, and we'll be feeding information out to you and making the applications available. I know some of the applicants have had some difficulty. It's the first time of this system. It's a dramatic change from the former alternatives program funding application process. So there's some hiccups and some things that have been found, but hopefully that'll be resolved for the next round, and the process will be simpler and easier for them to navigate. Any questions about the program, current projects, or new? Mark?
Do you have members that November 16th group that review those, or are you looking for people to volunteer to do?
If you want to let us know now, you can certainly do so, but as we would get the applications, and if it doesn't work for your schedule, you certainly understand that for the 16th, or anybody needs to go remotely. But at least the option will be out there for the full MPO voting membership. But yeah, if you definitely have an interest, I know Don from Union County indicated that at the last meeting. So, yeah.
Good.
So it's open to all, but yeah, if it just doesn't work out or people don't have a sincere interest in November 16th for that review committee, they don't have to participate. And then the full MPO will have all the information for the meeting on November 19th to approve the recommendation. Thank you all. I think that concludes our agenda item I, and we're into the proposed meetings for next year, and that's Jim, I think.
All right, for 2022, we are planning on 6 regular meetings of the MPO. Tentative dates for those are shown on page 78. No action is required on this today officially. What we're doing is sharing these dates with you, and we're asking you to check your calendar
Let us know if any of these conflict, particularly if it's running over something like PPA, a conference, something that you know may impact a couple of the voting members. So check your calendars. Please let us know any conflicts as quickly as possible. If there are conflicts, we'll look at alternative dates and we'll bring these back to you for the November meeting and ask to finalize them at that point. Any questions? Okay. Moving on to item K, the Unified Planning Work Program update. The staff report begins on page 80. Last meeting, we talked about submitting 2 projects to PennDOT for funding through the PennDOT Connects program. Those have both been approved, so we've updated the UPWP to include them. That's the Hogan Boulevard study in Clinton County, looking at bicycle and pedestrian concerns, and the 522 corridor study in Snyder County. We've had a preliminary meeting for each of those. We're working with the consultant team on what would be included in the scope and draft work orders, and we're looking to get those moving as quickly as possible, because the caveat with that is that the funding expires June 30th of 2022. And because of where we are with the master agreement for UPWPs, there is no possibility to extend that or carry it over. Since the last meeting, we've also been working on the draft UPWP for FY 22 to 2024. Since you saw this at the last meeting, we've added the budgets and the split between projects. It's lining up with how we think our staff is going to be spending our time. The guidance for UPWPs indicates that there is a small amount of SPR funding available for year 1. That's competitive on a statewide basis, can be used for various planning studies. It's 80% federal funding, and you have to bring 20% local match to the table. As we've done in previous years, we want to open this up and make sure as members that you're aware of this opportunity. We've included brief scopes for 3 projects that could be considered. None of these is definite at this point, so they're all labeled S3. The idea is that we narrow this down, and the final UPWP that we ask you to adopt at the next meeting would have 1 or maybe 2 of these included. Or, you know, we ask that if you've got planning studies that you're working on, something that you submitted for the long range plan or something that's come up since, you let us know by October 20th. And then depending on what comes in, we'll work out the prioritization for this and figure out what can be submitted. Based on what we've seen for previous years, usually the way we make that selection is by looking at what has committed local match. So if you've got that 20% to bring to the table, that really tends to set you apart from the other candidates. So that's the quick wrap up of the SPR funding. And as I mentioned, we're going to bring the final version of the UPWP to you for adoption at the next meeting. The report lists the other meetings and studies we've been working on since June. And I guess I'd ask that you'd reach out to staff, let us know if you have any questions on the activities listed. Steve, we've also got the update for the recent HOP submissions. Do you want to spend a moment or 2 covering those?
Yeah, this is something we try to include every packet now. If you're not plugged into the PennDOT highway occupancy permit application process, you may not be seeing these land developments as they're submitted. But we try to get this in there. Any revisions since the last meeting, we reflect in the table. So page 87 includes that information. You can see the milestones on submissions. Yeah, if there was a request from the PennDOT district staff for revisions to the applications, or sometimes, you know, if they had a traffic impact study that's being submitted along with it. You can see the type of driveways based on the volumes reflected there as well, and who the engineering firms are and so forth. So we just want to get that out for your information if you're not currently seeing it. And some have trickled in since this was developed about a week ago. That's kind of, it's a very fluid process. There's always submissions, there's always reviews taking place. And so we'll capture any updates since early part of September in our next meeting. But yeah, you see the listing there, and you see the types. If they're foreign to you, feel free to reach out to us or the district staff, or make sure that you're getting added with an account on the HOP e-permitting system.
Want to hit the limited English proficiency plan
Yes.
under this item too?
Yep. Also in this part of your package, we have a draft, including revisions to our limited English proficiency plan. And that document begins on page 118 of the packet. The last one was developed in 2015 timeframe. And then we had just a couple of minor slight changes that were adopted in 2017 by the MPO. But we felt going to this next tip update, it was necessary to address some enhancements to the document. And we would consider it a minor update to make sure that it reflects current procedures and practices for the MPO. That we wanted to clean up a few of those for things that are actually being done, and eliminate some things that are referenced that are no longer available to us, such as interpretation contracts through PennDOT and such. So to make it more accurate with the procedures that are in place. Also, we wanted to refresh some of the data. It was using 5-year American Community Survey data from 2007 to 2011. So we went and downloaded the 2015 to 2019 data. Some caveats, with Census Bureau and the data changes, it collapsed and aggregated some of the language data. So you can't, get at a block group or tract level, or even a county-wide level, some of the data used to do through there, and some of the breakdowns. So there's been changes in that process, to consider, but we have more recent data that's available from those surveys by the Census Bureau included. We also went through and refreshed and updated some of the resources and some of the appendix items. Just so we know, this is a huge packet. We didn't include all the appendices in what's printed for you or available in your online version. We will, for the November meeting, make sure we have that full information available for your consideration. But again, we're looking at this as a minor update. We've been coordinating with the PennDOT district staff and also the PennDOT Central Office Bureau of Equal Opportunity to make sure we're reflecting current standards and practices, coming out of Federal Highway Administration, Federal Transit Administration, PennDOT. And so, again, we're looking to have this acted on in November. We have a few more changes to make here. We have mapping to update for the next version that you'll see at a tract level, looking at the concentration of the language groups for limited English proficiency purposes, and then also the overall totals as well. So we'll update the mapping, we'll update some of the yellow text that you see in here that was draft for this version, and we'll get the full appendix items for the next meeting. But we want to put it out there in advance for initial take or review if you have questions, comments on it, and then get this further refined for November and to lead us into the next tip period. And then we'll continue to evaluate it on an annual basis. And if there's major changes in legislation, certainly we'll need to address that with the document as well. But ahead of November, we'll make sure we're sharing it with the PennDOT Central Office team. And if there's anything that needs to be changed or revised, we'll look to get that incorporated, make sure you're acting on something that is satisfactory to PennDOT as well. Any initial comments or reaction to it, Mark?
So one of the concentrated areas of folks that didn't speak English very well is in Mifflin County, and that's West Germanic, otherwise colloquially known as Pennsylvania Dutch. As you know, that there's a lot of Amish, and it's identified in this particular plan that there's over 2% of the population is Amish. It's the highest concentration of Amish in the region. And, obviously we deal with Amish folks quite a bit in our office. I won't say quite a bit, but we obviously have to deal with Amish. But one thing that you'll find is in the plan is to identify being able to provide feedback to those folks. It identifies phone and internet, which those folks don't have access to. So one thing that I'd like to point out is that we actually have to have a LEP for CDBG funding, for example. And we've identified, obviously, the West Germanic language as a concentrated area in the county, but we basically stated that we've not found any issues in which they can't communicate with us in person. So One thing I might have you consider in the future is if you'd like to even use our office as a satellite office, if people want to communicate one-on-one with someone like myself, I'd be most certainly willing to do that in case they have any specific questions about the transportation outreach that's going out. Because, obviously they're not going to use the phone and the internet to get that information. So one-on-one seems to work the best, and you'd be willing to coordinate on any of that. That would make a reasonable adjustment for the plan.
Okay, great. Appreciate that. And I know if there are any other best practices that you're working on, I think we reference in here that a lot of times they rely on the bishops, so trying to go out and reach people individually is hard. So those people usually speak English well, and it's not a written language, so you kind of don't have to do the translation to satisfy them. But yeah, if there's other means that you have to connect them with this kind of satellite, option works well, as there's projects being done in Mifflin County. That's great. And we do list bold things in there, like the Union County Comprehensive Plan, and then what was done down in Juniata County for some outreach with Spanish-speaking populations. Yeah, just because we didn't have a lot of newer things that were done since those projects, but if you guys know, and the representatives know of other things that have been done recently to reach limited English proficiency populations that have been successful, feel free to let us know. We can get a little, snapshot of those in here or reference those. And the same if you know of other resources that should be listed as community contacts or anything. We'll want to make sure that's current and up to date as well. So any other tips or ideas you have? I know we have had requests for translation, but we do have a service that's available to us that we can use for out-of-public meetings or interpretation. And then there's various entities that can be used for written translation as well in there. And I'll highlight one change to our website. We have a document translation request form now, and if people can use that, that's usually the easiest, less intrusive or difficult process. If people want to use that and translate it and put the request in for a document. And we also have now what are called language taglines, kind of like what you get with your insurance bills or invoices and things like that from your health carriers, where they have those language taglines if you need to request assistance. We have that for I think about 5 or 6 languages currently in the appendix as well, in addition to Spanish. So that's another thing we're adding to our main documents here going forward, those language taglines to request assistance if it's needed, kind of to proactively put that out there. Yeah, if there's other tips, recommendations you have, feel free to let us know. We'll incorporate those in here. If there's other resources or things that that are effective to reach these populations that don't speak English well, I'll be glad to factor that in. Thank you, Mark. And I guess I'll close there on the LEP plan unless there's any questions.
If there are no questions on that or the earlier items, the HOP and the UPWP, then that brings us up to item L, the Active Transportation Committee update. Catherine, would you walk us through that, please?
Sure. Keep it super brief here. There's a little listing on page 148 of your packet that updates some of the current things we're working on. Just a couple of key things to point out. The future meeting dates were approved at our last meeting, so they are on there. And we are also working on developing branding for the committee. So if you have any particular interest in that, please feel free to reach out and I'll send you the link for the next meeting where we're talking about it. So unless anybody has any questions, I'll leave it there for the Active Transportation Committee.
Okay, then that brings us up to item M, the member forum. Our collection of items that might be of interest starts on page 150 of the packet. So we've got a flyer in there for the PennDOT Innovation Days. We have a very brief summary of the T-Rock report. I think we've cut it down to 10 pages. So if you want just a little sample of that, there's something to draw from there. We did not pull the flyer, but we do anticipate that the draft statewide long-range transportation and freight plans will be available for comment later this month. So we will share the links on those as they are available. You have our usual listing starting on page 150. That kind of covers our grab bag items. I'd like to open the floor up now. Are there any members of the MPO or any stakeholders on the call who'd like to provide an update of what's been going on at your organization or other things you think the members should be aware of? All right, that is a really quiet group. Any feedback on the hybrid meeting format? I know we had a rough start today. It took us an extra 20 minutes or so to get up and rolling. But we do have a couple of members actually in the room. Is this something you'd like to see us continue for the November meeting? Did this work well enough that we should keep at it and work to smooth out the rough spots? And if you feel like that's putting you a little bit on the spot with the call this morning, you can feel free to reach out via email or give us a call later on and provide that input.
Jim, this is Steve Phillips. Just work out the glitches beforehand. It would make it a lot easier rather than taking that 15 or 20 minutes of stumbling around there. You know, try to get it squared away as soon as possible, you know, prior to the meeting.
Understood. And I do want to give a tip of the hat to the unflappable Mr. Postupak, because he just was able to keep a really cool head through that and really keep his patience. So we appreciate the service he did for us this morning.
Jim, given the low turnout of in person, any thoughts just going back to SEDA COG meeting room?
You know, if it was just going to be us and you, that's where I was at. So, you know, we had 3 voting members on the list to make this morning. Lincoln called in, but at 3, I'm willing to try it if you're interested in actually having a conversation. If you feel like this is too much of a pain and you'd like us to go back to the way we've been doing it for the past year and a half, I'm open to that too. So that's really what I want to hear.
Well, there's the upward trend in the cases, it seems now too, so it might be important from a safety standpoint.
To be honest with you, Jim, like 80% of people on this call didn't say a word the whole meeting. So it makes it difficult to have these meetings whenever people aren't willing to talk on this hybrid, because we don't know if people are eating their breakfast and what they're doing. So I like the option of having being coming in person. That's why I'm here. I like looking at people in the eyes and seeing if they're paying attention. I'm not calling out anybody specifically, but you know, it's very difficult. We're sitting here waiting for motions and no one's saying anything. So it's my opinion that we should try and do as much in person as we possibly can. I think it makes the meeting go better. We can have better discussion, but that's just my opinion.
This is Eric Staley from Columbia County. I kind of like the hybrid version, to be honest with you, because, for example, today I've got another commitment here that I'm stepping out of the office to. I would not have been able to attend the meeting at all if everything was in person, because I just wouldn't have been able to make those connections due to travel time constraints. So I kind of like having that flexibility to be able to either go in person or be able to kind of increase some productivity around the office here by calling in virtually.
Wow. Ask that question a little louder, please.
I was just curious what the law is on the ability to continue to do remote meetings. Where's the Open Records Office ruled on, how they ruled on that?
So from what I can see, that's really murky.
Because we're not under governor's emergency declaration anymore, any of that stuff.
Right. And so from what I can see, the permission that allowed boroughs and townships to meet fully virtual was part of Act 15. we enacted the legislature, not part of the governor's emergency declaration. And even though the emergency declaration was renewed, Act 15 wasn't. So that's why when you go out to Office of Open Records, they've got a notice up telling you that you can't continue to have fully virtual meetings. MPOs, I don't think anyone has a firm ground on the legal standing. It's not clear to me, since we are a subgroup of the SEDA COG, which is an arm of the county governments. Are we following the county code, the township code, or the borough code? I don't think anyone's even checked into that. And from the PennDOT side, okay, they've got multi-county MPOs like us. They've also got single county or bi-county MPOs, and the regulations might be different. So what we've seen emerging as good practice is that MPOs, the ones that are aware of and are engaged on this issue, are pursuing hybrid meetings, and their caveat is that at least one member of the staff and one member of the committee has to be at the physical location of the meeting. So I think that's our model for good practice. I think it would probably take a series of lawsuits for people to really sort out what the legal grounds is and where we're really standing. So I guess I feel like legally continuing the hybrid meetings is maybe a little bit safer. It is a lot more work. So we've got some mixed feelings on the part of the group. We've clearly got a learning curve to work through. Getting your skills up with some of these technologies is just a matter of having enough practice to do everything wrong enough times that you start doing things right the first time through. We're not there yet in our learning curve. I think we can get better. So,
I guess it's one thought to Mark's point. What about having the people on the call on the video? So Mark can see if they're paying attention reading the records or not. I mean, this is one of the few forums I've been on, an online meeting where nobody on the call is on video. This is.
And that's become kind of the norm for our group. And it started out, maybe in that first April meeting, most of us, or at least half of us, had our cameras on, but we've all been turning them off. So,
hey, Jim.
Yeah.
Yeah, Dean Roberts here. Well, first of all, I don't think anybody wants to see me, but as speaking for PennDOT, I think we like the flexibility of the virtual meeting. I know it may be harder on your end to set it up and everything like that, but it seems like all our other areas are, at least for the foreseeable future, going that way. And also, something happened in the middle of this meeting where I don't know if you moved closer to the microphone or not, but I could hear you a lot clearer toward the end of the meeting than I could during the beginning of the meeting.
Yeah, mostly I got over my stage fright, or I leaned up a little probably, but that goes back to the learning curve that we've got to get our feet under us with this. So from what you're hearing, most of the MPOs are sticking with some sort of hybrid approach?
I think, yeah, and I think it's wise going forward, again, in the foreseeable future, to at least offer that, as a PennDOT employee, sure, I'd like to get out occasionally. But we're still sort of in the thick of things in a way. And I don't know of any area that has not at least offered hybrid. There has gone just solely in-person meeting. Now, all the ones I have been to recently have all been hybrid, so.
I guess in terms of the location, I think our constraint currently at SEDA COG for the boardroom is 10 people can be actually in the room. So that'd be one of the limitations if we were to change the venue. How do we determine who actually comes into the room, that kind of thing? versus here. We can certainly distribute a little bit more broadly. Is that 10? Does that seem right? From the
It's 12,
12.
but yeah, we're in that range, and that's, we didn't talk about this at the top of the meeting, but we are grateful to Union County for the use of this room because it gives us this flexibility, and grateful that to be able to lean on the JRA because they've been sorting through the AV issues for their meetings. It really gave us a head start on this. So it sounds like maybe we have a little bit of homework to do on our side to try and get through the AV process, get a little bit better handle on that. I guess I'd suggest that we'd watch the numbers, and if we're still in high levels of transmission and we can assume that the turnout's going to be pretty low, maybe that's something we're comfortable doing over at the SEDA COG building. But if we're kind of where we are now, where it's going to be for some of you a day of the meeting decision whether you can make it over, depending on what the rest of your schedule is, we'll keep the date here at Union County and hope to get a little bit better in the setup. So we'll keep trying to get better on that. And then I guess our assignment for you all is to get comfortable with the idea of maybe leaving your cameras on for the meeting next month, so we get an idea of who's on the other end of the line.
Does anyone use the chat? Do we need to review any comments? Looks like I see a bubble there. Maybe, is there any questions or comments through the chat? Looks like 3. Maybe. Ah, that was a pointer, wasn't it? Okay, thank you, Kyle. Hey, this is Gene from Federal Highway. Just something we've kind of seen in other meetings. Sometimes if you have cameras on for everyone and not just for the person who's speaking, that can sometimes have a negative effect on the bandwidth and kind of cause issues also. So I just wanted to point that out.
Yeah, it seems to depend on area and day to day. I know with the even with the planning partners meeting on Wednesday, we happened to have a thunderstorm blow through, and it made it dicey on my side just for audio. So, all right, we'll share those out. We'll be very clear going into the November meeting where the physical portion of that is going to be, and we will communicate with you ahead of time so that you have a clear idea of what we're doing. It sounds, I guess if you really get down to it, it sounds like we're probably looking at the same thing, like there's enough in the mix. We should keep a hybrid meeting. We're not sure where the numbers are going to be. We should get better at the audio visual. So we'll try this again for November and see how much smoother we can make it. I appreciate the couple minutes it took to provide that feedback and to help us get a little bit better at this. Thank you. Anything else anyone would like to bring up before we close out the meeting? Then at 11:12, we will consider the meeting adjourned. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Jim.
Have a good one, everybody.
Thank you, Jim.